how do I play this? This episode, Metalfoes. Okay, so pop cards get pluses is how I refer to the main mechanic of Metalfoes. It is the effects that every single Metalfoes has in terms of the main deck monsters. They all have the exact same pendulum effect, which is once per turn, you can target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, set one Metalfoes spell/trap card directly from your deck. Essentially, what this allows you to do is duplicate your cards so that every single pop you get gets you another card and you can pen summon back everything, basically making it so every single card that you've popped with the Metalfoes effect that can be pen summoned back equals 2 cards. So you can almost double the cards that you have. For example, if we start with a hand like this, just nothing but Metalfoes cards, Metalfoes monsters, and what that's going to allow us to do is cycle back and forth and then pen summon. So for example, I can start by setting in the pen scale 2 gold drivers. I can use 1 gold driver on the other to pop that and then set a Metalfoes spell or trap card directly from my deck, so I can set a combination, for example. I can then go ahead and activate another scale, so let's say gold driver. I can use that on the Volflame, again, set another Metalfoes spell or trap directly from my deck, and once again I can activate another scale, pop the other scale, and set another Metalfoes spell or trap directly from our deck. I can activate our last scale, and before using that, we can go ahead and pen summon all of the scales that we have just popped. So what we've essentially done is we have plussed from 5 cards that we started with to the 8 cards we now have, so we've plus 3. And of course, because we now have the counter and the combination set, that's going to allow us to plus next turn and set up even more of a board. Then the fusion, of course, will get used up. Fusion with its own effect, of course, shuffles back in, as most of you probably know, and that allows you to basically just plus a ton of cards, get a really decent board set up and everything like that. And of course, we still haven't used our scale over here. Now, what I generally like to do is, because I have the combination and the counter set, is I'll actually pop my last scale to get another set from deck. So let's just set the quick play, for example. And then next turn, I can actually flip up my combination, use this scale to pop it, set a Metalfoes spell or trap, most likely the fusion, because that's what we have in deck. And then this effect engrave allows me to search my other scale. And then of course I get counter, etc, and you just go off next turn. But that initial mechanic of popping cards and getting pluses is what makes the deck so potent and so consistent at setting up for next turn. It's the kind of mechanic that makes a deck go from, oh, this starting hand isn't very good, to next turn being, holy crap, I have a really good board now. It allows you to set up so consistently for your second turn that even if you kind of brick for your first turn, your second turn is still going to be average or above. So yes, pop cards, get pluses is just a phenomenal mechanic, and it really does make Metalfoes the deck that it is. Just really consistent and really good at going from okay to great. Okay, so it's pretty common knowledge that most Metalfoes players will be playing Gofu. So Blackwing Gofu the Vague Shadow, the reason it's played so often in Metalfoes is because it has really good interaction with the deck. So if you're not familiar with Gofu, which I'm sure you all are, I'll explain the effect really quick. If you control no monsters, you can special summon it from your hand, and when you do special it that way, you can activate its effect to special summon 2 tokens. Now the main thing about Gofu, besides getting those tokens, which are important, I'll explain that in a moment, is that it is a level 5 tuner, which enables you to go into Ultimaya Zolkin. The way you do this is pretty simple. All you need is to start with the Gofu and 2 scales. So any 2 scales and the Gofu in your starting hand means that you can make your Zolkin. So how you would do this is, of course, you would special summon the Gofu, get the 2 tokens, activate a scale, use the scale to pop one of the tokens in order to set a Metalfoes fusion directly from your deck. Then you normal summon the other Metalfoes monster and you activate the fusion. The tokens have 0 attack and defense, which means they have 2,500 or less attack points, meaning that you can then fuse into Metalfoes Adamant, which is a level 5 non-tuner. You can then send both these to the graveyard in order to special summon out Ultimaya Zolkin from your extra deck. And at this point, all you really need to do is set a card. So if you have any spells like Painful Decision, for example, you can just set that and get the effect before using the spell. Or if you had an extra scale in your hand, you could of course activate that, target that initial scale to pop it, and then set a Metalfoes spell or trap from your deck which again is setting a spell or trap card so you can get the effect from that. So that is one of the main interactions of Gofu in the deck, but another really cool thing about Gofu, if I do not have a way at all to set a spell or trap card, I'm not going to want to go for Zolkin because I can't trigger its effect. However, what I can do is that I can actually still do that initial thing where I pop one of the tokens in order to set a fusion. I can actually fuse the token since it's a normal monster. I can fuse into one of the more potent Metalfoes fusions, which is a really good interruption, and that is Full Metalfoes Alcahest. That's something I think not enough people take into account, is that tokens are normal monsters, so I can go into the Alcahest with a Metalfoes and a token. So that's another really good interaction with the Gofu. Another really good interaction, because the card is just so good at being compatible with Metalfoes, is that in Metalfoes, you do have quite the selection of level 3 monsters. And Gofu has no restrictions on what he can be used to synchro into, because he is a tuner. So if you have any of these 3s, you can just synchro into an 8. And he is a dark tuner, which also enables you to make something like Void Ogre Dragon. And of course, one of the other really good synchros you can make, because all of your 3s are going to be pendulums, is you can make Ignista Prominence. So Gofu has a lot of really good interactions with the deck. Something else that's really subtle is that because you're plussing 2 with those tokens, if you then pop them with scales and set 2 spell or traps from your deck, you're plussing 2 cards that you then get to actually make use out of instead of just having tokens. Of course, that's only if you won't be able to do anything else with them. So yeah, as you can see, Gofu has a ton of interaction with the deck, and that is the reason why it is so popular in Metalfoes. Okay, so the next thing I want to cover is optimizing your interruption. Okay, so one of the main ways to optimize your interruption is, let's say for example, we start with a similar hand I mentioned earlier, just 5 Metalfoes monsters. There are many different ways to accomplish what I'm about to explain, but this is the simplest way for me to explain it where you guys can understand. Okay, so repeating what we did earlier, we're gonna go ahead and cycle our scales to set a bunch of back row. So let's go ahead and scale Volflame and Gold Driver. Gold Driver to pop the Volflame, set a Metalfoes spell or trap. Again, just cycle them back and forth, so set Stealin, pop Gold Driver, set a Metalfoes spell or trap, scale a Silvered, pop our Stealin, set a Metalfoes spell or trap, and then finally scale our last scale, and we can now pen 3. This is the kind of board you'll see quite often. You don't have to start with 5 Metalfoes. There are a few other ways to accomplish this, using stuff like Rescue Rabbit and of course Bismagear, which I'll explain in a second. So we can go ahead and use our last scale to pop the other scale, and we can set ourselves another Metalfoes spell or trap. So your main goal here is to end up with 3 monsters, the fusion, and the quick play. Now, how I see some people do this is that they won't bother going for the quick play. They just set 2 counters in a combination, for example, and then fuse up into the Alcahest, and then just be content there, and of course get their shuffle, get their draw, see what they get, etc. And that's going to be their interruption. They go like, okay, cool, I have an Alcahest, I can interrupt. But the better way to do this, the much better way to do this, is instead of going for the Alcahest, even though it is tempting, it's much better to go up into Orichalc. Now, the reason for this is that you now have Orichalc and a normal monster, so a Metalfoes and a normal monster. And because we set that quick play, we can now, in our opponent's turn, use the quick play to fuse up into the Alcahest, and we can go ahead and get Orichalc's effect in the graveyard, since it was sent from field to grave, to target a card our opponent controls, destroy it, and that's 1 interruption, and we can of course suck something up whenever we feel necessary, and that's 2 interruptions. So instead of just a 1 interruption, doing our setup like that, we got 2 interruptions. Just stopping for a second and thinking, okay, can I get that set up, as opposed to just going... As tempting as Alcahest is, I know you just want to make it quickly on your first turn to just know that you have it. It is better to just do what I explained so you get the double interruption, which is much more potent. So quite a simple one, but again, something that you just need to take into account. If you can get that setup of Orichalc and a normal monster with the quick play, getting that double interruption setup is really good. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have Bismagear now, which came out somewhat recently in Invasion of Venom. This lets you set up this a lot easier. So instead of having to start with 5 Metalfoes, you can now just start with 4 and set it up in a very similar way. So how you would go about doing that, so let's say we had these on our opening hand, we would basically go ahead and set our scale like this. So we can go ahead, Stealin and Stealin to pop Stealin, that goes to extra deck, just set whatever. Then we can go Bismagear, target our Stealin. Make sure you at least have the fusion set at this point, by the way. Then we can go Gold Driver, And yes, we only have the 2 in the extra deck now, so when we pen summon, we do only have the 2. But because of Bismagear's monster effect, which none of the other Metalfoes have, it lets you get away with just having the 2 to pen summon, because now we can make our Orichalc, so we can fuse into our Orichalc. Because of this effect to search in the end phase, we can use Gold Driver on Bismagear to pop it, set the quick play. We can then use Bismagear's effect and get our search in the end phase. We can go end phase and just search a Metalfoes normal monster, and that goes to our hand. And because we have the quick play, we now have the setup for the double interruption. And like I said, there are many other ways to set this up. Having a Rescue Rabbit greatly helps as well, because that gets you 2 Metalfoes, so it lets you make the Orichalc with 1 card, which is really, really nice. Okay, so let's say we've done our turn, we've gone through a bunch of scales and stuff like that, and we're getting our Bismagear effect in the end phase to search. We've gone through 2 Gold Drivers and 2 Stealins and the Bismagear. We've used more high scales than we have low scales, but depending on your build, of course, you might run more scales than another. You always want to make sure to look through your deck when you're searching and make sure you pick out the appropriate scale in order to keep your deck as balanced as possible, to make sure you have an even number of each scale in your deck. However, you also have to balance this out with Rescue Rabbit. You have to make sure to keep your Rescue Rabbit live. Let's say I have 1 high scale left in deck more than I have low scales. I want to go ahead and search a high scale. I might go for Stealin, for example. I now have 2 Stealins out of my deck, so Stealin is no longer a target for Rescue Rabbit. It's kind of crazy how this 1 card can dictate how you play. Because I haven't seen my Rescue Rabbit yet, I want to make sure that I'm keeping as many live options as I can in my main deck. So I've already gone through 2 Gold Drivers, for example, so my main targets in deck now are going to be Stealins and Silvards. If I search out a second Stealin, well, Silvard is now my only target. And if I go through my next few turns without seeing the Rescue Rabbit, and I happen to draw into a couple of Silvards, this is no longer live, and that's going to be very irritating. Now, of course, there can be ways around that, like shuffling in a Scale from Grave with Mithrilium, but that's definitely not something you want to count on. So do your best to make sure you keep an even number of scales in deck, but depending on the situation, you might want to prioritize Rescue Rabbit over doing that. So it's finding a balance between these 2 things that really separate the better Metalfoes players from the not so good Metalfoes players. Just making sure you take everything into account before making even simple decisions like a search for a Bismagear. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. That was the How Do I Play This episode for Metalfoes. Quite a simple one, but as I've mentioned in other How Do I Play This episodes, this series is for people who are just looking to get into a deck and want to know kind of the basic mechanics of it and what they need to take into account before making decisions, etc. This definitely isn't for people who are already experienced in playing the deck. But anyway, as always guys, I really appreciate every single one of you watching this. If you want to make requests for videos, just leave a comment, and if you ever want to discuss anything, again, leave a comment and I really appreciate it. Keep in mind, I am now live streaming as often as I can, so keep an eye out on your feed, make sure to check my channel every so often, and you can check my Twitter account as well. Since I do tweet every time I start live streaming, if you want to catch my live streams, check my Twitter account and keep an eye on your sub box as I said. But as always guys, I appreciate every single one of you watching this. Take care and duel on.